My name is Cora Sterling, and for most of my 26 years, I have been a student of quiet things. As a landscape archivist in the damp, gentle city of Port Blossom, my days are spent with the ghosts of gardens, deciphering the silent language of faded blueprints and brittle, sepia-toned photographs. I trace the lines of forgotten rose arbors and the faint outlines of paths long since reclaimed by moss and time. It's a peaceful profession, one that suits the person I've always been, observant, patient, and content to exist in the margins. I grew up here, in a salt-sprayed house overlooking the gray churn of the Pacific. Our home was perched on a bluff, constantly buffered by the wind, a place of dramatic views and even more dramatic emotional currents. For as long as I can remember, the atmosphere inside that house was dictated by the moods of my younger brother, Leo. He was the sun around which my parents, Martha and Robert Sterling, gratefully and anxiously orbited. I was a distant moon, reflecting a little of his light when it suited them, but mostly shrouded in the quiet dark. Leo was 23, a rower with a physique carved from granite and a competitive spirit that burned like a forest fire. He was destined for greatness, my parents believed. His scholarship to the State University was their proudest achievement, his seat on the varsity crew team a testament to their own frustrated ambitions. All of their resources, financial, emotional, spiritual, were channeled into the singular goal of Leo's success. His specialized diets, his expensive carbon fiber ores, his training camps in sunnier climates, these were the family's sacred investments. My own achievements were quieter, less tangible. A scholarship to the local college, a degree in historical preservation, a job that I loved, but that they didn't quite understand. Dusty old papers, my father would say with a genial shrug, before turning the conversation back to Leo's latest race time. I learned early on that the easiest path was one of minimal presence. I was the responsible one, the one who remembered birthdays, who made the coffee in the morning, who listened patiently to endless dissections of Leo's performance. I thought, with the naive hope of a neglected child, that my quiet competence, my unshakable loyalty, would one day be seen, would one day be enough. 8 months before my world fractured, the lease on my small downtown apartment ended with a sudden rent hike I couldn't afford. My parents offered me my old room, just until you save up for a down payment, sweetie. I told myself it was a practical solution, a temporary step back to take a larger leap forward. But a deeper, more honest part of me knew I was returning for another reason. I was searching for the warmth of a home I had idealized but never truly experienced, hoping that as an adult, I could finally find my footing in the shifting sands of my own family. It was a fool's errand. The house wasn't a home, it was a high-strung shrine to Leo. His trophies and medals had colonized the living room mantelpiece, glinting under the track lighting my father had installed. The refrigerator was a fortress of his protein shakes and pre-portioned, high-calorie meals, leaving little room for the simple groceries I'd buy for myself. I became a ghost in my own childhood home, drifting through rooms, my presence as unobtrusive as the coastal fog that softened the edges of the world outside. I saw the cracks in the facade. I wasn't blind, merely conditioned to look away. I saw the unnerving intensity in Leo's eyes when he lost a race, a darkness that went far beyond mere disappointment. I saw the dent in his bedroom wall, shaped suspiciously like a fist, which he'd blamed on a piece of workout equipment falling over. I saw the way his girlfriend, a sweet girl named Chloe, would flinch when his voice sharpened, before she stopped coming around altogether. I saw it all, and I cataloged it in the silent archive of my mind, because in the Sterling family, asking questions was an act of disloyalty. Silence was love. And I, desperately, wanted to be a loving daughter. The night it happened was a Saturday in late October. The air was thick with the smell of rain and wood smoke. It was the day of the regional championships, the most important regatta of the season. Scouts would be there. Leo's future, as my parents had repeated for weeks, was on the line. His boat came in second. He didn't come home for hours. When he finally walked through the door, well after midnight, the house seemed to shrink around him. He carried the damp chill of the night in with him, along with the sour, aggressive smell of whiskey. His face, usually ruddy with health, was a pale, tight mask of fury. His movements were heavy, deliberate, each step on the old hardwood floor a small thunderclap. I was in the kitchen, curled in the worn armchair by the window, reading a book. The house was quiet, my parents having gone to bed hours earlier, their anxiety a palpable hum in the air even in their absence. My first instinct, as always, was to make myself smaller, to blend into the shadows. I put my book down, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "What are you still doing up?" he snarled, dropping his duffel bag on the floor with a thud that echoed the one in my chest. It landed on the pristine floor I had washed and waxed that very afternoon. "Just reading," I said, keeping my voice soft, placating. I couldn't sleep. He went to the fridge, yanked it open, and the cold light illuminated the taut cords of his neck. He grabbed a bottle of water, then slammed the door with a force that rattled the magnets holding up his training schedule. "This whole season is a joke. The coxswain is an idiot. My stroke is off." The litany of blame began, a familiar tune. I did what I always did. I tried to soothe the storm. I tried to be the good sister, the calm harbor. "It was just one race, Leo," I said gently, offering a small, hesitant smile. "You were amazing out there. Second in the entire region is incredible." I added, trying to find the right words, "It's not the end of the world." That was the line. The one I didn't know existed until I crossed it. A simple, well-intentioned cliché. But in the volatile atmosphere of his rage, it was a spark hitting a gas leak. His dark eyes, already clouded, went utterly black. The manufactured calm he sometimes wore shattered, and I saw the raw, terrifying engine of his anger. "What did you say?" he whispered. It was the whisper that frightened me more than a shout. It was controlled. It was venomous. "Nothing. I just meant." I never finished. He moved with the explosive speed he usually reserved for the water. In 2 long strides, he was in front of me. He grabbed the front of my sweater, his knuckles grinding into my collarbone, and hauled me out of the chair as if I weighed nothing. He was a mountain of muscle and fury, and I was a sapling in a hurricane. He didn't drag me. He threw me. My body sailed across the short distance of the kitchen, and my side connected with the sharp, unyielding edge of the marble countertop. The air shot out of my lungs in a single, silent scream. A white-hot, searing pain erupted in my ribs so intense it stole my vision, replacing it with a static of black and white stars. I crumpled to the cool linoleum floor, my mind struggling to understand what had just happened. I remember the smell of lemon floor polish and the sight of the dust bunnies under the radiator. I remember trying to draw a breath, but my lungs refused to inflate, seized by the impact. And then came the kick. Through the haze of pain, I saw his leg draw back. He was wearing his heavy, steel-toed work boots. The blow landed on the exact spot where I'd hit the counter. I felt more than heard the sickening crack, a brittle, definitive sound that seemed to come from the very center of my being. The pain was a white nova, and then, mercifully, nothing at all. When consciousness returned, it was in fragmented shards of agony. The world was a blurry watercolor of pain. Every tiny gasp was a fresh torture, a knife twisting in my side. I was still on the kitchen floor, my cheek pressed against the cold, grimy linoleum. My mother was kneeling beside me. Her face was a blur, but her voice was sharp. She wasn't looking at me, but towards the hallway. "Cora," she whispered, her tone urgent, cold. "Your father's waking up. You have to get up. Now." I tried to push myself up, but the movement sent a bolt of pure agony through my torso. I collapsed back, a choked sob escaping my lips. "I can't," I gasped, the words barely audible. "I can't breathe." Her gaze finally dropped to meet mine. There was no compassion there, no maternal softness. There was only a frantic, terrified calculation. Fear for him. "Listen to me," she commanded, her voice low and sharp as a shard of glass. "You tripped. You were coming from the bathroom and you tripped and fell against the counter. Do you understand me? Say it. You tripped." Her eyes darted around the kitchen, as if looking for confirmation from the silent appliances. "You know how he gets. This could ruin everything for him. The scouts, the scholarship, everything." He had shattered a part of me, and she was already sweeping up the pieces to protect him. Somehow, Fueled by a primal instinct to hide my own brokenness, I began to crawl. Inch by agonizing inch, I dragged my body across the kitchen floor, leaving a snail's trail of misery. I made it to the small downstairs bathroom, pulled the door shut, and fumbled with the lock. I slid down the wall to the floor, my body trembling uncontrollably with shock and pain. I could hear their voices through the thin wood of the door. My father's low, angry rumble. My mother's panicked, placating whispers. And Leo. I heard his heavy footsteps go up the stairs, followed by the definitive slam of his bedroom door. He went to bed. Then, my mother's voice, clear and final, cut through the haze. "Keep quiet in there," she said, her words not a plea, but an order. "You'll ruin his future." That was the moment the foundation of my life turned to dust. I wasn't a daughter. I was collateral damage. The next morning, the pain was a living entity, a hot, sharp-toothed creature curled around my ribs. I couldn't stand up straight. I dressed in the loosest sweater I owned, moving with the slowness of a frail, elderly woman. When I emerged, my father was waiting in the kitchen, a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked at me, his face an impenetrable mask of stone. There was no, "Are you all right?" No, "My God, what happened?" There was only a flat, cold command. "Get your coat. I'm taking you to the urgent care clinic." The 10-minute drive was a masterclass in silent intimidation. He stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The misty Port Blossom morning felt gray and hopeless. "You tripped coming down the stairs," he said, the words clipped and final. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the official story, notarized by his paternal authority. "That's what you'll tell them. Your mother is a wreck. Leo is beside himself with worry about you. We don't need any more drama in this house. Promise me, Cora." I was so beaten down, so steeped in a lifetime of seeking his approval, that I simply nodded. A single, tearless nod. The lie felt heavy and foul in my mouth, but what was one more stone on a back that was already breaking? At the clinic, the fluorescent lights hummed with an irritating buzz that vibrated behind my eyes. A nurse with a kind, tired face took my vitals and asked what happened. I recited the script. I fell down the stairs. Then the doctor came in. She was a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a calm, centered presence that felt like a quiet pool in the middle of my chaotic pain. Her name tag read Dr. Lena Petrova. She looked at my chart, then at my face, her gaze gentle but missing nothing. She pressed lightly on my side, and I couldn't stifle the cry that tore from my throat. "I'm going to order an X-ray," she said softly. "But first, I want to talk to you for a moment. Alone." She glanced meaningfully towards the waiting room door, where my father was no doubt pacing. The pattern of this bruising. "Cora, it's not consistent with a fall down a flight of stairs." She leaned a little closer, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Did someone hurt you?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father was just beyond the door, a sentinel guarding the family secret. My mother was at home, probably scrubbing the kitchen floor of any evidence of my existence. For my entire life, my family had looked at me, but they had never truly seen me. They saw a quiet daughter, a useful helper, a potential complication. But this woman, this stranger with kind eyes, saw the truth etched in the purple and yellow map of my skin. She saw my pain. A dam I didn't even know I'd built inside me began to crack. Tears, hot and thick, welled in my eyes. "I can't," I stammered, the words choked with the fear of my father's rage, my mother's disappointment, Leo's ruined future. Dr. Petrova didn't press. She simply nodded. "All right, let's get those X-rays." When she returned, she closed the door and clipped the dark films to the light box. The image was stark alien. My own bones, illuminated in ghostly white. And on two of them, clear as day, were jagged black lines. "Fractures. You have 2 broken ribs, Cora," she said, her tone professional but laced with an undeniable gentleness. "And another is badly fractured. This type of injury, this clean break, requires a significant direct force. A hard kick or a punch." She picked up a clinical camera and, with a quiet, "May I?" took several photographs of my bruised torso for her records. Then she turned back to me, her gaze steady and unwavering. I am a mandated reporter, Cora. That means if I have reason to believe a patient is a victim of a crime, particularly domestic violence, I am legally and ethically obligated to report it to the authorities. So I am going to ask you one more time. Did someone do this to you? The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. It was a moment of profound and terrifying clarity. A lifetime of my family's silence versus this one stranger's insistence on the truth. Me against them. I looked at the X-ray, the unimpeachable evidence of what he had done. I looked at this doctor, a woman who was willing to stand for me when my own mother and father would not. In a voice so small it was almost carried away by the air, I spoke the truth. My brother. The words hung between us, fragile but impossibly heavy. The dam broke completely. Sobs racked my already broken body. Please, I begged, the tears streaming down my face. Please don't. You don't understand. It will tear my family apart. It will ruin his life. His life. Dr. Petrova's voice was firm, but not unkind. It was the voice of reason in a world of madness. Cora, he broke your ribs. What about your life? I cannot, in good conscience, let this go. My primary responsibility is to you, my patient. And, just like that, the burden of the choice was lifted from me. She made the call. She notified the county's family services, who in turn notified the Port Blossom police. By the time my father drove me back to the house on the bluff, the world had been irrevocably altered. A police cruiser was parked in our driveway, its presence a stark and brutal intrusion into our carefully curated world of denial. The moment I stepped through the door, the betrayal in my parents' eyes was instantaneous and absolute. What did you do? My mother shrieked, her face contorted with a fury I had never seen directed at anyone but Leo. My father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. I told you to keep your mouth shut, he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with anger. You just destroyed this family. You destroyed your brother. I hope you're happy. But for the first time, their words didn't pierce me. The fog of fear and obligation that had clouded my life was beginning to burn away, revealing a hard, clear landscape of truth. While they raged, while they focused all their energy on protecting the son who had brutalized me, I walked past them. I went in my room, pulled out the suitcase I'd never fully unpacked, and began to fill it. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do. I only knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the bones Leo had broken, that I could not stay in that house for one more second. I had to save my own life, because it was terrifyingly clear that no one else was going to do it for me. The first few weeks were a disorienting blur of pain, paperwork, and fear. Dr. Petrova was my only anchor in the storm. She gave me the number for a local women's advocacy network. Their primary shelter was full, but a kind case worker named Sophia spent 2 days on the phone and found me a small, subsidized apartment in a quiet, older building on the far side of town, nestled amongst cedar trees and perpetually damp ferns. It was little more than a room with a kitchenette and a bathroom. The walls were thin, and the furniture was mismatched and sparse, but it was a sanctuary. It was safe. It was mine. The first sovereign act I took for myself was filing for a restraining order against Leo. Standing in the hushed, solemn halls of the courthouse, my hand shaking so badly I could barely form the letters on the page, was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. But when the clerk stamped the document, a profound, quiet sense of power settled in me. It was a line drawn in the sand, a boundary declared not in a whisper, but in the unassailable language of the law. My family's reaction was swift and desperate. The calls and texts were a relentless barrage. My mother left rambling, tearful voicemails, painting me as a cruel, vindictive daughter who was tearing the family apart for a simple misunderstanding. My father sent terse, threatening texts about cutting me off financially, as if the meager emotional support he provided hadn't been severed years ago. They even sent me a long, stilted email of apology, supposedly from Leo, full of phrases and sentiments so unlike him that I could practically hear my mother dictating it over his shoulder. I read it once, then methodically blocked their numbers and email addresses. the silence that followed was a balm. Dr. Petrova, my unexpected guardian angel, connected me with a pro bono lawyer. Eleanor Finch was a sharp, fiercely compassionate woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that saw straight through to the heart of things. "The first thing we do," she said at our initial meeting, her voice calm and steady, "is stop thinking about their feelings and start focusing on your rights." With Ellie's guidance, I filed a civil suit against Leo, not just for my medical expenses, but for pain and suffering and for the wages I'd lost from being unable to work. The combination of the police investigation, the restraining order, and the lawsuit finally pierced the protective bubble his university had built around him. His position on the crew team was suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. The golden future my parents had mortgaged their souls for was suddenly tarnished, mired in the consequences of his own actions. Meanwhile, I began the slow, arduous process of building a life from the ground up. I started therapy with a woman Ellie recommended, a gentle soul named Dr. Cohen, whose office was filled with thriving plants and the scent of Earl Grey tea. In that safe space, I didn't just talk about the broken ribs, I talked about the lifetime of smaller, invisible fractures. The forgotten piano recitals, the praise always deflected towards Leo, the hollow ache of being emotionally unseen. I learned new words like enmeshment and narcissistic family system. I learned that I had been parentifying myself for years, managing their emotions, soothing their anxieties, all while suppressing my own needs. I learned about boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as fences to protect the garden of my own well-being. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to tend to that garden. I bought a small, cheerful yellow kettle for my apartment. I hung prints of old botanical illustrations on the bare walls. I started taking long, solitary walks along the Port Blossom coastline, breathing in the clean, salty air, feeling the solid earth beneath my feet. I made a friend, a woman named Sadie, who worked at the nursery where I bought a resilient little snake plant. She was funny and direct and treated me with a simple, uncomplicated kindness that felt revolutionary. Months passed. The legal case crawled forward. Leo, on the advice of his university-appointed lawyer, pleaded no contest to a lesser charge of misdemeanor assault in the criminal case, avoiding a trial but receiving a sentence of probation, a significant fine, and mandatory anger management counseling. The civil suit was settled out of court for a sum that covered my expenses and gave me a small cushion of security. His rowing career was over. The scholarships were gone. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through a collection of plans for a historic public park, an idea began to germinate in my mind. The park had been funded by a community grant over a century ago, a gift to the city from a woman who wanted to create a space of peace and beauty for everyone. I saw a parallel. I had been given a second chance, a space to heal. What if I could create something similar for others? I spent the next 2 months pouring all my energy into writing a grant proposal. I envisioned a program for adolescent girls from neglectful or tumultuous homes. It wouldn't be therapy, but a kind of therapeutic horticulture. A safe space where they could learn to cultivate something, to nurture life, to get their hands dirty and create beauty from a patch of neglected ground. A place where their quiet, steady work would yield tangible results, where they could see their own strength reflected in the resilience of a garden. I called it the Briarwood Project. To my astonishment, I received the grant. A local philanthropic foundation saw the merit in the idea, and with their seed money, I secured a lease on a small, overgrown lot behind an old community church. The final, public shattering came almost a year and a half after the assault. The Briarwood Project was a fledgling success. We had a dozen girls, a garden blooming with stubborn, beautiful life, and we were holding our first small community fundraiser in the restored conservatory of the city's historical society. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I was at a simple wooden podium, my voice a little shaky but clear, telling our small group of supporters about our mission to cultivate resilience. Suddenly, the tall glass doors at the back of the conservatory burst open. It was Leo. He looked diminished. The powerful, athletic build had softened. He was thinner, and his eyes, stripped of their usual fire, were hollow and haunted. But the rage I saw with a jolt of ice in my veins was still there, banked like embers. "You," he shouted, his voice echoing unnaturally in the glass house. He pointed a trembling finger at me. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. "You did this. You ruined my life. All because you were clumsy and fell." My heart hammered against the very ribs he had broken. The old Cora, the ghost girl, would have shrunk. She would have wanted the floor to swallow her whole, to disappear into the ferns and shadows. But I was not the old Cora. I took a deep, steadying breath. I calmly placed my note cards on the podium. I stepped down from the low stage and walked, not away from him, but towards the center of the aisle, so that every person in that room could see us both clearly. The walk felt 100 miles long. I stood there in the cathedral-like silence of the conservatory and looked directly into my brother's eyes. I saw the broken boy inside the angry man, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of the old, familiar pity. But it was followed by the cool, clear strength of my own hard-won truth. Then, I turned my back on him and faced the crowd, the parents, the donors, the young girls from my program whose wide, watching eyes were fixed on me. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. It was as clear and steady as a bell. "This," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, "is the man who broke my ribs." I let the words hang in the warm, fragrant air. I let their weight settle in the room. Then I delivered the final, quiet truth. "And this is the family who told me to be quiet about it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not an empty silence. It was dense, heavy, and more powerful than any shout. It was a silence of profound, dawning understanding. In that moment, in that beautiful glass house I had filled with life, the entire, ugly story was laid bare. Security guards moved in, their presence almost gentle as they calmly escorted a sputtering, defeated Leo out of the building. I never went back to the house on the bluff. I never spoke to my parents or my brother again. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apology that could ever mend what had been so thoroughly broken. Their version of love was a cage, and I had finally learned to fly out of it. Leo's life wasn't ruined by me. It was ruined by the violence he chose and the denial my parents nurtured. They didn't lose a daughter that day in the conservatory. They had already thrown one away long ago, in a quiet kitchen in the middle of the night. My peace did not come from revenge or from their downfall. It came from the quiet, daily work of tending my own garden. It came from the sound of laughter from the girls in the Briarwood Project, from the feeling of cool earth under my fingernails, from the simple, profound joy of watching something grow. I found my family not in blood, but in the community I built, in the steady friendship of Sadie, the fierce advocacy of Ellie, the quiet compassion of Dr. Petrova. I had spent a lifetime studying the language of quiet things. But the greatest lesson I ever learned was the power of my own voice. I didn't need their love to be whole. I had my truth, my work, my garden. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough.